WatchCharts is the world's leading secondary watch market research platform. Dive into the data yourself at WatchCharts.com. The last year saw market prices dropping across the board for hyped watches after rising for a prolonged period. And with spring in the Northern Hemisphere we see signs of the market for Rolex starting to finally recover from that prolonged now period of dropping market prices. In this video, we'll talk about the high-level trends for the Rolex market and some specific examples of sold and unsold listings for some references that recently got discontinued at Watches and Wonders. As always, we welcome you to check out the listings and the rest of the data that we're going to be featuring in this video for yourself at WatchCharts.com. We'll start by looking at some high-level trends. And so we'll look at specifically the overall market index, the Patek Philippe market index, the Rolex market index, and the Audemars Piguet market index in this view. And what you're seeing here is essentially the 3-year performance relative to a starting point in April 2020, the performance for each of these 4 indexes over the next 3 years relative to that starting point. So this is basically a comparison chart, and the starting point for that comparison chart is 3 years ago. So since then, what you can see is the index that saw the greatest rise and then has also retained most of that to sort of finish out on top is the Patek Philippe index. Next up is the AP index, then the overall market index, and then finally the Rolex market index. The comparison tool is a pretty neat way to do these sorts of comparisons over multiple time ranges for, whatever sort of model or index or whatever price history chart you might be looking at on WatchCharts.com, and then compare up to 5 additional indexes and or watches. So the reason that this is interesting is that it shows us what that long-term trend, in this instance has been. These brands and the general market sort of saw this long-term sort of increase leading up to the spring of 2022. Then there was this precipitous rise. And then since then, prices have been sort of slowly declining, and it wasn't obvious if that decline was ever going to stop. But what we can do is just specifically zoom in on the Rolex market index and look at the last 6 months. And what we can see here is that in terms of the percentage change, in the last 1 month, the index has gone up 1.6%. In the last 3 months, it's up 0.9%. And in the last 6 months, it was only down 1.6%, which basically means that the index is back up to where it was basically in November. And, the month-over-month sort of changes and what's going on there is something that we talk about in our monthly market dispatches. So you should definitely sign up on our website and you'll sort of start getting those in your inbox on a monthly basis. But, over the last month, certainly, and now even over the 3-month period, the Rolex market index is starting to show a significant increase. And we obviously want to, dig into why that's happening and sort of talk about some of the watches in that index that are seeing that rise, but also just try and see how much of this can be explained by some of the watches that were announced to be discontinued at Watches and Wonders recently. So that's actually what we're going to do next. We'll run through some of the watches that got discontinued, starting with the reference 116508 Cosmograph Daytona. This is the full yellow gold Daytona reference with a green dial in this instance, but of course there are other dial variants available as well. That's commonly known as the John Mayer Daytona. And he talked about this in a Talking Watches episode from way back in 2019. But over the last year, you can see it sort of has been following the general trend of the market in sort of going down. But then in the lead up to Watches and Wonders this year, it was starting to see an appreciation in price. Nowhere near its peak, which this watch currently has a market price of $76,300, but at its peak, this was a six-figure watch. But since its discontinuation, its price has started to creep back up, and in fact, a recent listing from just the 13th of April on eBay from a reputable seller shows that somebody paid for a 5-year-old watch, in fact, with box and papers, almost $100,000. So the discontinuation seems to certainly have had an effect here, because previously, of course, this watch, as we say on the market price, was around the $76,000 mark. And then the cheapest active listing we have for this watch right now, again, with the green dial, is for almost $89,000. So still above the current market price, but below the nearly six-figure price that somebody paid just a week ago. So this and this is actually the cheapest active listing. So there are other active listings for much more than this as well. So it's obvious that market is comfortable sort of paying more than what we think is the current market price for this watch on some of these listings. The next one, which also got discontinued, is the reference 116509 Cosmograph Daytona, this time in white gold with a blue dial and the red sub-registers. There was a time when I remember seeing this watch in the case and the sales rep at the time telling me that it was the last one they had. And then, of course, it left the case, never to be seen again. My personal recollection is that it was a stunningly beautiful watch in person. I was nervous enough to not ask to even try it on. But right now, it's got a market price of around $47,400. Also followed the same trend over the last year of seeing a peak and then starting to decline. And here, a listing that sold on basically the day that it was announced or became apparent that this watch was not going to be available anymore, March 30th, this was sold for $46,000. And then since then, if you want the blue dial configuration specifically for the 116509, there's a listing from 2 weeks ago that is around $53,000 on Rolex forums, but prices are basically climbing above that. And not necessarily below. So this is another one where it's been discontinued, and we see the market starting to command somewhat of a premium over what we think our current market price is. Let's next look at the reference 116400GV, the Milgauss, and this is another one that sort of follows that same trend. It has a current market price of around $11,300, also discontinued, and someone as recently as April 15 paid about $1,000 premium over that for the black dial version of this watch. And there's a currently active listing for the blue dial version for around $12,800, and that's for a mint version from 2016. So discontinuation for this watch also does not seem to have done its market price any disservice. And then the last one we're going to talk about is the 50535 Cellini Moon Phase. This is, I don't believe, a watch I've seen in person, but from the pictures, it looks like the Moon Phase in particular was quite nice. But because it's a dress watch from Rolex, there's no hype around it. The market price trend looks, much more sort of ambiguous in terms of whether or not it follows the general market trend for some of the pieces that we talked about before that are, much more hyped. But this has a current market price of $24,300. There was a listing for this that sold recently for $22,000. And of course, if you want to buy one, then today from a reputable seller, you can get one for about $26,000. So if we look at these watches in summary now, what we'll see is that in each of the cases where these watches has been discontinued, certainly over the last month, it's up. Even over the last 3 months, it's seen, some sort of price appreciation. Over the 6-month time period, time range, that trend sort of starts to break down. But what I wanted to sort of just cover as an interesting observation here is that these particular references are dead, but Rolex has done this in the past where they will revive a watch but just come back with a different reference. So if you wanted one of these and you liked it, Rolex may come back and decide to make it again, but of course, being Rolex, it'll be slightly different, slightly better. You can think of the 36 millimeter Explorer going up to 39, then coming back down to 36, and now you can even get it in 40. So there's sort of like an analog for the 39, and then of course other references that just sort of go away and then come back in a similar fashion. But if we look at the market index again, sort of to come back to the larger point rather than just sort of for specific discontinued references, and say that the index is up 1.6% in the last month alone. This index is not just watches that were discontinued. Watches that are up in the past 3 months, even, for example, in this index include Daytona, GMT Master, Sea Dweller, Submariner, Day-Date, and Datejust references. There's 30 of these watches, and if you want to check out the full list, you can definitely go to WatchCharts.com. And then at the other end of the performance spectrum, if we don't just look at the references that seem to be doing well, even the worst performing reference in the Rolex index is only down 3.8% in the last 3 months, which means that, sort of if you think of the performance band, even the worst performer hasn't done terribly badly, especially when you compare, the worst performers from Patek and AP, for example, which are down, 12.3% and 13.4% respectively. And both of those indexes are also down over the last 3 months. So the entirety of the Rolex market sort of seems to be doing better than the other two of the big three. This doesn't say anything about whether or not these watches relative to retail are trading at a discount or not. And that's a point that we've covered sort of in detail before as well. But, we're interested to hear from you. Are you in the market for a pre-owned Rolex right now? What are your thoughts about sort of some of these price movements? Does the fact that the Rolex market is starting to recover change in any way how you think about whether or not you're going to buy, or buy right now, or buy with some sense of urgency? Let us know in the comments below. We'll have new videos out on Tuesdays and Fridays, so see you in the next one. Thanks for listening.